do anything. Oh my God. So hi, everybody, and welcome. It is so wonderful to see you and to be there. I am thanking Decker live and in person for having being willing and able to cover the two last art pieces. It worked really well that they were two sculptures back to back, you know, like that. It kind of formed a good thing. And now for in today's lecture, drum roll please, it is the 1st of August, and we are starting the very last sections for both of us. It looks like you have 4 pieces left, Decker, so I'm going to assume that you have about this week and next week, which is perfect. It takes us right to when we're going to start school, and we'll revisit this time of day and you know, these days, but so far so good. I actually was going to totally do that, except plot twist, we're going to do a little bit more literature in my section as well, because as I threw onto the Discord, wow, I was not liking it, and then I was loving it. So on that note, today is Monday, so Decker usually goes first on Mondays while I personhood the chat. And so we'll do that, and you take as much or as little time as you need. I don't know how long it will take me, because I set it up to do the literature, and then I read the literature, and then I got so into the literature that, well, you're going to just wait and see. So if you, oh, wait, I have to set it up for you to be able to share the screen. JK. All right.
That always helps.
Yeah, I try. All right. I am going to, you should be able to have screen share capabilities, and we are on a new section. So you'll send the link afterwards when I post this stuff. And I will perhaps mute myself.
All right. So hopefully you can all see this. So we're starting section 5 of the Art Resource Guide, Nature and Nation. So you're wondering, gee, we're going way back in time. This is going to be the furthest back we go. So we're talking about late 1700s, but then all of a sudden we're going back a couple thousand years, more than 2,000 years, almost 3,000 years back. This section begins with engaging with nature in early America, and they're trying to set the stage for why we're going to be studying the works of art that we're studying today, because it seems sort of out of place. And my wife even said, "What are you covering today?" And I told her, "Oh, we're going to do Chaco Canyon." She goes, "Well, what's that got to do with Revolutionary War stuff?" And I was like, well, the artwork has been focused so far. If you think about the different sections, we focused on sort of Europe. You know, how did Europe alter our perceptions? You know, early artwork, what we're doing. We got to neoclassicism and history painting, and you know, all these different things. It's like, well, we focused on European artwork and sensibilities, and there was artwork still here, right? Columbus did not discover America. It was already here, right? And people were already living in it, and people already had things built and created here. So we're going back in time here, discussing Native American Indian cultures and their works. So indigenous cultures of North America were very in tune with their local environment. And one of the things we're going to be talking about today is the area of northwestern New Mexico. So the natural landscape was a prominent feature of architectural sites like the one we're going to be talking about today. Pueblo structures in the Southwest, built between 700 and 1150 of the current era. So I was thinking BC. We're not going back 3,000 years. We're only going back 1,200 years, 1,100 years. No big deal. The use of nature as both material and subject matter. it has long been a prominent aspect of Pacific Northwest sculpture arts. You know what, I've been spending, it's like, I want to start the recording again, but we won't. I'm so in tune with what I've been preparing for Chaco Canyon. I forget that the first few paragraphs of the section are sort of an intro to the entire section. So yes, we're going to hit northwestern New Mexico and some structures there. That's in today's lecture. But in a later lecture, we're going to hit aspects of the Pacific Northwest, in specific totem poles carved by the Haida and Tlingit peoples of Alaska in the 1800s. We're also going to hit European settlers a little bit more, specifically how they tried to document the New World for a curious public back in Europe. When settlers and explorers start going across the United States, when we're taking it from a Eurocentric point of view, which is almost always, they're seeing it for the first time. They're seeing all these grand vistas. Landscape painting was not number one on their hierarchy of important things to paint, right? History paintings were number one, and then portraits were number two. Landscape painting was there way at the bottom. Remember, we talked about this a few weeks ago. As they start seeing all this unexplored, to a European point of view, unexplored lands, they're finding these marvelous natural reserves that just beg to be painted. And so landscape painting becomes more elevated in this time period if you're looking at colonial expansion into this unexplored world, at least to them, you see. So they specifically mentioned John White and how he accompanied expeditions to Roanoke Island, North Carolina, which was the first British colonial settlement around the 16th century. And his watercolors focused on an abundance of natural resources, specifically marine life and agriculture. And they've actually got a link in the resource guide, so I thought I'd use it. Just showing this is again John White, and it shows Indians fishing, variety of aquatic life in the water, birds flying overhead. In the foreground, a canoe carrying 4 figures and fish. Beyond that, 2 figures spear fishing. And a stretch of water fenced off. I've never seen fenced off water. In the distance, another boat way in the back. This is watercolor over graphite touched with body color and gold. And it's just indicative, and you can zoom in on stuff like this, but I find the links really, really interesting. He's trying to depict things that were unusual in the New World that you wouldn't have found back in Europe. His watercolors, abundance of natural resources. John White. John James Audubon, John James Audubon spent his entire career attempting to document the country's bird species. And we studied him a lot last year. Well, maybe it was the year before. It all blends together. American artists focused on the wilderness and dramatic landscapes to celebrate the country's unique identity and freedom from tradition, right? We've had the Revolutionary War now, where we've got our own country. We've got to come up with our own iconography. What is the United States? Well, these vast untapped natural resources of the United States. We don't have to paint the way we used to paint. So we're free from tyranny, we're free from tradition, and we're unique, and we're trying to find that uniqueness. Thomas Cole. There should be an H up here. The H is down here. Thomas Cole, Thomas, popularized the genre of landscape painting. Followers became known as the Hudson River School. Again, this is not a brick and mortar school. It's a style of painting. This
one of my mother's favorites. You can't see me type that in the chat, but we had him years ago, yes. Maybe even the year that Glenn was born, and we loved the Hudson River School. And of course, she had a house up along the Hudson River for my college years and beyond for a while. And so we both like that. And I have an Alfred Bierstadt
Oh yeah.
replica in right here. So I'll show it to you.
I'm
All right,
really yes, I'm really into Alfred Bierstadt, so I love his stuff. So this is the Oxbow. It's the Connecticut River near Northampton, around 1836. Thomas Cole, credited with popularizing the genre of landscape painting. So again, this idea that we need to come up with stuff that is uniquely America. So this sense of nationalism begins to emerge. Prominent national landmarks begin to stand for the whole United States, like Niagara Falls. You know, you see a picture of Niagara Falls, you go, oh, that's the United States. Grand Canyon, United States. Now, Mount Rushmore, United States. There are, of course, that's not natural, but there are things that are indicative to United States. Old Faithful, maybe Yellowstone. They mention sublime depictions of Western United States, which encouraged westward expansion. You know, if it's all desolate looking, people aren't going to want to come. And so people like Alfred Bierstadt and Alfred Jacob Miller paint things that are just really gorgeous. I love Bierstadt's works. We're not studying any of them this year. They get quite huge, but these are just some of these are.
Look,
these
that's
are very,
the
very
middle one is
large.
called Kern River Valley. That's us. We
There
don't
you
look
go.
like that because would be what Kern River would look like if it, had water in it.
Yes.
I have one that's his version of Yellowstone, which is it's the Grand Tetons, and that's where I'm buying, where I have property up in Wyoming. So
you can go through, you can probably find that somewhere in here. They're just gorgeous. They're just gorgeous, and they're quite large paintings. There's Mount Rainier, Half Dome Yosemite, Sunset. I mean, you can just go on and on and on. So these paintings and more, just really, really large, expansive. And when we talk about sublime, it's so beautiful, it hurts. That's sort of the definition of sublime. Painters like Thomas Moran and photographers like Timothy O'Sullivan accompanied U.S. geological, why can't I talk today? Accompanied United States geological surveys. They documented natural wonders for curious Eastern audiences. I got to fix both of these. This is killing me. Curious Eastern audiences and Thomas with an H, Cole. Before I send it to you, that was just going to bother me. So this also inspired the modern conservation movement. If we've got these grand vistas, and if some of these natural wonders are going to stand for the United States of America, it would be a shame to destroy them in the name of expansion. Yes. We're going to get back to that. We're going to end with that. Moran, in particular, he was a painter. Moran's landscapes from survey expedition in 1871 were used to persuade Congress to establish Yellowstone as a national park. So now we get into our specifics of today. This is the Four Corners region of the American Southwest. We call it the Four Corners region because you have Utah up here, and Colorado, and New Mexico, and Arizona. This historically where these four states meet. They've actually got a marker. It's not quite in the right spot, and people take photos, tourists with one hand, one foot, and you're standing and crawling in four states simultaneously. What the heck? So this is the Four Corners region of the American Southwest. It's where Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado meet. And between the 9th and 12th centuries, so 1850 to 1150 AD, or Common Era, sorry, don't use AD anymore. Around this time, about a 300-year period, this ancient culture that lived there, sometimes referred to as Anasazi. So if you hear Anasazi Indians, it's a catch-all for a lot of different ancient groups that are sort of related to current groups and sort of not, because there's been a lot of intermixing, but we won't get into all that right now. Anasazi from the Navajo means enemy ancestors, which you think, enemy ancestors. So we hate our ancestors. It's sort of a derogatory term if you are a Pueblo Indian. So Pueblo Indians consider Anasazi objectionable because it means enemy ancestors. Pueblos call themselves something else. Well, they're Pueblos. So it gets very confusing. So you kind of go over it. And first of all, the word Pueblo can be confusing. It is a Spanish word rather than a Native American word. And it means village. And yet it also can mean a structure, a dwelling, and it can also refer to the region's indigenous people. So a Pueblo could live in a Pueblo, and it gets confusing. So you have to be careful how it's all used in context to understand that. So ancestral Pueblos developed farming communities throughout the region around 799 to 1000 of the current era. They first lived in underground pit houses. And as the population expanded, the size and complexity of the dwellings increased. Some structures were built into natural landscapes through construction of multi-household complexes within rock formations backed against canyon walls. These are called great houses. Large, multi-storied, 4 or 5 stories tall, ancestral Puebloan structures made of stone with a wood roof. Some scholars theorize they were a form of public architecture used for temporary clan gatherings for religious ceremonies, trading, and knowledge sharing. A lot of history here. I have been all through here. I first started going through all here about 30, 40 years ago with my father, who was an amateur archaeologist after he retired. And we went through we camped out in Canyon de Chelly for a week. Then we went over to Chaco Canyon. Then we went up to Mesa Verde. And then we went through Monument Valley in Utah. And every now and then we'd make a summer of doing that. So I've crawled through all of these ruins, many of which you are not allowed to crawl through any longer, but you can still go visit. But we'll get into that at the end of our slide. So specifically, Chaco Canyon, a large area, again, this area right here, a lot of different structures in Chaco Canyon. We're studying one in particular this year called Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Pueblo Bonito meaning pretty village. One of the 9 great houses in Chaco Canyon. Remember the definition of great house: large, multi-storied, ancestral Puebloan structure made of stone with a timber roof. One of 9 great houses. So there's 8 other ones besides this one. Here's some ruins. This picture does not show you the enormity of Pueblo Bonito, and Pueblo Bonito itself does not show you what it really looked like at the time, because all we see are the remnants of the first floor. It could have been 4 to 5 stories tall. We'll get into some of the pictures in a minute. Going to hit some of the highlights here. The name Pueblo Bonito was recorded during the Washington expedition of 1849. The expedition was led by Lieutenant James Simpson. He had a Mexican guide by the name of Carabajal, and he's the one, Carabajal, Pueblo Bonito, pretty village. He came up with it. The Navajo name, and I'm slaughtering this, and one of my students from the last couple of years is Navajo, so I'll have to get his correct pronunciation of this. Navajo name was Tsi-Pui-Ai-An-Ai-Ai, which means leaning rock gap, because there was a large overhanging slab of sandstone that later on fell and crushed part of the building in 1941. So we call it Pueblo Bonito instead of going by the Navajo name, because we'd probably all mispronounce it forever and ever and ever. This was constructed by ancestral Pueblo people over a 300-year period between 850 and 1150 of the current era, built in several stages. Great House began as a small ark built between, not an ark like Noah's Ark, but in the shape of an ark, built against the north wall of a broad, shallow canyon. It was enlarged in 3 stages between 1020 and 1130. The quality of craftsmanship evolved over time. I've been there. You can see when different building structures were added to things. You can clearly see the change in how they put the rock together. Very, very interesting. The way they laid the stone. The oldest sections are made of very rough stone staked to the ground. The final stages show carefully fitted and smoothed dry laid stonework. And if you want to know what we mean by dry laid stonework, it means there's no mortar. These stones were carefully smoothed and fitted so that they wouldn't necessarily lock together, but they would fit together so that when all that was, and they weren't using a cement here. In other areas, they did use a form of cement and a form of mortar, but here they did not at this site. At least as far as I recollect. The resource guide did not bring it up. I've got several books that I have to find. I couldn't find them. My father has helped write a couple books on this region. So I need to find these and I couldn't, they're in a box. So I will get back to you on that. The expansive structure formed a semicircle with 600 to 800 rooms. By the time they were done expanding over 300 period, this area, Pueblo Bonito, pretty village, it's a giant, great house, 600 to 800 rooms. This is like a big, huge hotel, but it's not a hotel. It's not, doesn't function like a hotel. I'm just saying, it's a lot of rooms, 600, 800 rooms. Only outlines of the first floor are visible today. Originally, some sections 4 stories high, and the resource guide only said 4. They think in some areas, current research, maybe a couple areas, actually 5 stories high, but the resource guide is going to say 4. Any questions, you're going to say 4. I don't know which one I want to go to first. Let's see. Oh, this is it. Short little video. You get tired of me mispronouncing things. This is a good video. It's going to load. Here we go.
Remains of early settlers in the wilderness, Chaco culture. This is Chaco Canyon in New Mexico in the United States. In this canyon are the remains of a small cluster of settlements dating back 1,000 years. 400 such settlements are scattered over a wide area. The people who used to live here are known as Pueblos. They are descendants of indigenous Americans and were well established between the 9th and 12th centuries. These stone-built houses were mostly for multiple dwelling. It shows us that a unique social structure existed here. The remains of tableware and household goods were found here, proving that a highly developed civilization existed already. Pueblo Bonito was the largest settlement in Chaco Canyon. Many buildings.
So I'm at, so it's a distance view. Pueblo Bonito, again, this is the bottom floor of multiple story, again, 600 to 800 rooms in this giant complex.
Many buildings were constructed near each other in a semicircular area. These holes are the remains of the prayer halls known as kiva. The large number of kivas found on this site indicates that the place was a ritual site. Pueblo Bonito had about 40 kivas and is believed to have been a major religious center, drawing people from distant settlements. The diameter of this kiva measures about 20 meters. It was originally covered by a roof. Drums would beat loudly on the central stage. People would have sat on benches around the center and prayed in rhythm with the drumbeat. Behind the kiva was accommodation for the worshippers. This is one of the buildings where they lodged. This structure had 5 stories and is believed to have had 800 rooms or so inside. Wooden logs were used to make the floors and ceilings. They were mostly pine logs, which didn't grow in this area. Several roads lead to and from Pueblo Bonito. This is another indication that this place was once an important center of culture and worship.
Yeah, that's actually our campground host. They just kind of watch the campground.
This is the smarthistory.org website on Chaco Canyon. And if you want to read more about it, you can see where I stole the picture from. And you can see petroglyphs. We'll be talking about these. Again, the high desert region of New Mexico where water is very scarce. The remains of dams, canals, and basins suggest that Chacoans spent a considerable amount of their energy and resources on the control of water in order to grow crops, such as corn. Today, visitors have to imagine the greenery that would have filled the canyon. Astronomical observations clearly played an important role in Chacoan life, and they likely had spiritual significance. Petroglyphs found in Chaco Canyon and the surrounding area reveal an interest in lunar and solar cycles, and many buildings are oriented to align with winter and summer solstices. So just like if you think reading about Stonehenge and how Stonehenge is aligned with the solstices, we think your culture's 1,000 years old. In this case, in the case of in England, Stonehenge, several thousand years old. They have the ability to and the planning ability to build things so it would line up with events that would only happen twice a year. Pretty amazing. Here's the Great Kiva. Number of great houses. Here's where they mention Carabajal, Simpson's Guide, Mexican. That's why they came up with a lot of Spanish words for names. So just kind of a neat little site that shows you a lot of good stuff. These T-shaped doorways. We'll be talking about that. So Pueblo Bonito, again, constructed between around 850 and 1150 CE over several different stages. 3 large kivas and 32 smaller kivas, for a total of about 35. You heard in the video that said almost 40. Well, there you go. Circular, below ground rooms, kivas, used for ceremonial purposes or political gatherings. Larger kivas could fit hundreds of people. The people would usually be flanking the walls, right next to the walls, while dancers performed in the center, drums, all that. Many other rooms used for storage. Rock carvings, petroglyphs, found on canyon walls, tracked astronomical data. Ancient Pueblo, interested in lunar and solar cycles, many buildings were oriented to align with the winter and summer solstices and the cardinal directions. The doorways aligned so that one could see through multiple rooms and across the length of the building, allowing for greater communication across larger spaces. T-shaped doors found in other great houses in Chaco, as well as other sites in the region. A little bit about kivas. Actually, this one doesn't have any information. It's just got some pretty music along with some interesting photos. I won't play the whole thing, so later on can kind of get an idea. Now, normally I'll mute the music here. There's no informational stuff. this is not how it would have appeared to them. Remember that. All these grasses and things have grown over the last 1,000 years. And these would have been roofed with timber. But it gives you the, the immense size, how many different places, and we're only, again, seeing the bottom story. It's just deteriorated over time. But I like this video. You can just kind of zone out to it. They'll show you some of the petroglyphs and some of the astronomical markings, keeping track of significant astronomical occurrences. On one of them, it clearly is depicting a supernova event that has been using scientific astronomical data. We know that must have been what they were referring to. It's just interesting. Oh, this was, yeah, this was interesting, but I'm just going to pause and just some of the pictures in here. There are several different sites, and Chaco Canyon just being one of them. And if you have more time, and it gets into the floor plan of a typical kiva. Again, the resource guide doesn't go into it, but I just wanted you guys to get a little bit more of the information that I think is from an interesting point of view. Again, they won't test you on any of these detail, but you had to have an air shaft because they had smoke and incense burning, so you had to have ways of being able to breathe, and how they were oriented to the cardinal directions. So just interesting stuff. Besides this is Pueblo Bonito, which is just one of many great houses, 9 great houses in the Chaco Canyon area. And there was a vast network of wide, straight roads connecting to the great houses, not only the 9 great houses in the area, but linking to more than 150 great houses throughout the New Mexico region. Logs that were used for the roofs of the buildings came from trees native to San Mateo and the Chusca Mountains. Over 240,000 trees were used to construct the great house. These materials were transported from more than 50 miles away. They were not indigenous to the area. So imagine, you didn't have big, huge, you didn't have trains like we do, didn't have trucks. You know, you're carrying these long logs, long distances, I don't believe they would have had horses yet. When they saw horses, when the Spaniards came, that was the first time they'd seen horses. Horses are not indigenous to North America. So imagine transporting all this lumber. The stone structures kept people cool during the heat of summer, and it also acted as insulating them from the extreme cold during the winter. Again, another view of the semicircular, some people call it D-shaped Pueblo Bonito. Chacoan artifacts, tableware, and household goods provide insights into their culture. More than 15,000 artifacts were found at Pueblo Bonito. Stoneware decorated with distinctive black on white geometric designs. Items provide context regarding Chacoan culture's contact and trade with other regions. Remains of scarlet macaws have been found on the site. You know, what's a macaw? Well, these are birds that are native to a region more than 1,000 miles to the south in Mexico and southern Mexico, particularly the Yucatan Peninsula. The Mayan cultures had macaws. Macaws not native to North America. So you go 1,000 miles north, remember, no horses, no trains, planes, or automobiles, but what they have is trade. Chaco Canyon was a major trading site, trading and perhaps religious. Chaco Canyon was probably never inhabited full time. These 800-room great houses were probably there for special occasions when they had giant trading sessions, or the civilization itself did not house that many people year round. It wasn't conducive to that. They're just now finding this stuff out. We'll get into this later. They're also found, some of the artifacts found, 15,000 artifacts, shells from the Gulf of Mexico. I'm sorry, Gulf of California. Why did I say Mexico? Gulf of California. Cacao from Mexico suggests trade networks between Mesoamerican and Southwestern communities. They found remnants of cocoa on pottery shards. You know, they're thinking that they drank cocoa, and the remnants are from, you know, drinking the cocoa. It's soaked into the, you know, a little bit. So cocoa, again, not indigenous. Shells from Gulf of California, birds from Middle America, not indigenous. They're thinking that turquoise was indigenous to the area. So the idea was, did the Chacoan civilization trade turquoise for these other exotic things? Turquoise has been found as far south as the Yucatan Peninsula, another place my father and I have traipsed all over. So the Chacoan culture was a highly developed in terms of agriculture, engineering, and architecture. Water there was very scarce. We're talking about northeastern New Mexico, high desert region. Water management a priority in order to live there, even part-time. They had an elaborate irrigation system, which demonstrates how the society engineered the natural environment. They had canals, dams, basins. People began moving away from the Chacoan Valley around 1150. Why? Well, they started making cliff dwellings. And so if you go up to Mesa Verde in southwestern Colorado, you'll see cliff dwellings. Was it because they were easier to defend? Really difficult to attack the middle of a cliff, especially if you don't have access to the ladder leading up and down into it. So was there an increase in warfare? A lot of different things. Some people theorize that because environmental conditions, particularly drought, may have contributed to the population decrease in the canyon. Summer rainfall was more plentiful than normal between the 10th and 12th centuries. After that, as the climate grew drier, Chacoans began leaving. Again, the resource guide does not talk about this, but I know from my past readings, this was, and from current readings of going to the links, this was never intended to be 100% occupied 12 months of a year. So yeah, the population decrease was never a constant population to begin with. I just wanted to leave that in there. But anyway, as the climate grew drier, they were using this area less and less. They began moving south, sometimes consolidating in smaller communities. I don't think it was ever one large permanent community. That's my opinion. As Chaco Canyon receded from prominence, other areas took on greater significance, in particular, Mesa Verde in Colorado. Great houses were built during a period of agricultural abundance, likely abandoned when the environment could no longer support the population. So Chaco Canyon, sacred and endangered for various reasons. It's viewed as sacred land for contemporary Puebloans who venerate ancestral Pueblo people as their forebears. This includes the Zuni and the Hopi, among others. That should be an I. I'll fix that later. The Antiquities Act, enacted by Theodore Roosevelt in 1906, established Chaco Canyon as a national monument. We're going to come back to this $3 million governmental project bungled video if we have time. Do we have time? We have time. Chaco Canyon is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's a region outside the national park boundaries which warrants further archaeological exploration, but is currently threatened by oil drilling and fracking. There are many articles, this one by the New York Times, and I've run out of my free readings of this, so perhaps Paula could read more on this if she has a New York Times subscription. How the treasures of Chaco Canyon are threatened by drilling. Some of you, if you haven't run off out of your links, you'll be able to access this better than I will. So it's talking about how oil drilling is damaging the area and fracking doing a lot of damage to the area. But just a few years ago, they won a court case in 2019. It says Greater Chaco region wins reprieve from fracking. Federal appeals court today held the U.S. Department of Interior's Bureau of Land Management illegally approved oil and gas drilling and fracking in the Greater Chaco region of New Mexico, a landscape sacred to tribes throughout the American Southwest and home to the Navajo Nation. We always knew the BLM wasn't doing their job. We watched their violations and noncompliance every day. And it's the suit targeted BLM's failure to account for the cumulative region-wide impacts of fracking, including impacts to water supplies, community health, air quality, climate, and cultural integrity of the landscape. The Bureau estimated nearly 4,000 fracking wells would be developed in the region, where more than 91% of the available land is leased for oil and gas drilling. There's a lot of pressure from the oil and gas industry, and especially during the previous president's period in office, got rid of any kind of restrictions that Roosevelt helped create during the Antiquities Act of 1906. So a lot of problems there. Also, I'm going to leave you with this last video, because if you ever want to go to Chaco Canyon and look at the beautiful, expensive museum that they've built there, there's a problem. We might have an ad. We've got an ad, a yucky ad, so we won't start off with the yucky ad, but that's okay.
Possibly go wrong when the government undertakes a multi-million-dollar construction project in one of New Mexico's most spectacular locations. According to a year-long Larry Barker investigation, it involves a bit of bureaucratic bungling, squandered tax dollars, and tons of priceless relics. Here's Larry's report.
It's a waste of money, and it's just appalling.
Somewhere along the way, the project got bungled.
Yes.
How would you explain this to taxpayers?
I don't think it's explainable.
There's something wrong in the rugged backcountry of northwest New Mexico, and just getting there is a challenge.
And the thing that goes through a lot of people's minds when they do this is, where in God's name are we going? This place is out in the middle of nowhere.
You leave the pavement south of Ngizi, follow a rutted dirt track past the flash flood warnings to one of the most important historical sites in the U.S. Welcome to the Chaco Canyon National Park. Between the years 850 A.D. and 1150, this remote spot was home to a thriving civilization.
You will be blown away.
Now retired, Dabney Ford was Chaco's chief of cultural resources.
You hit the canyon, you look at these astonishing monuments, and it's a huge surprise to people.
Consider the largest ruin in the park, Pueblo Bonito. Using only primitive tools, skilled craftsmen 1,000 years ago constructed an intricate 800-room complex unequaled for its masonry and architecture. Pueblo Bonito was Chaco Canyon's first construction project. Just down the road, you'll find the National Park's most recent undertaking. It's the spanking new $3 million state-of-the-art Chaco Canyon Visitor Center. But where Pueblo Bonito is an example of pre-Columbian artistry, This project is a case study in bureaucratic bungling.
This was a government project. In your opinion, did the government manage this in a responsible way?
Absolutely not. The Park Service bungled this. It's the most disrespectful thing I think I've ever seen, is why would we do that?
In an internal report, a Chaco curator wrote, quote, "It galls and embarrasses me that the National Park Service looked so incompetent." So what happened? Well, you need to go back. Beginning in the late 1890s, organized archaeological expeditions have excavated through 1,000 years of debris to uncover Chaco artifacts, clues to daily life of the long-gone Anasazi civilization.
There's no gold, there's no diamonds, there's nothing like that, but they are exquisite. They're the gems of 1,000 years ago.
Want to see some of those stunning relics? Well, you won't find them here. You see, archaeologists uncovered some 2 million artifacts buried in these ruins, but all of it, the trade goods, the jewelry, the turquoise, the pottery, was crated up and hauled away. Barb West is a retired Chaco Park superintendent.
The artifacts from Chaco Canyon fill up museums on the East Coast.
Because many of Chaco's archaeological expeditions were sponsored by East Coast museums and universities, those institutions took possession of the artifacts. That's why Chaco's antiquities are hidden away in places like New York's Natural History Museum and the Smithsonian. Some artifacts are at UNM, none are at Chaco. The National Park Service wanted to bring those relics back home. So as part of a multi-million-dollar, decade-long project, a new Chaco Canyon Visitor Center was designed to put excavated antiquities on public display. A climate-controlled exhibit room would showcase almost 4,000 priceless artifacts on loan from museums across the U.S. The space was open to the public in 2017. But if you come here expecting to see rare antiquities, you'll be disappointed. You see, the one thing missing from the exhibit hall are the exhibits. Oops. Aaron Adams is Chaco's Chief of Cultural Resources. How many original artifacts are on display here at Chaco Canyon?
Currently, we have none on display.
There's an empty room with cases in it. No artifacts.
Somebody at the Park Service bungled this project.
That's right.
Despite teams of architects and contractors, the Park Service committed a colossal blunder. And the focus is on the new building's heating and air conditioning, or HVAC system.
Today, does the HVAC system in this room work properly?
No, it functions, but it does not work properly.
In fact, after spending $365,000 trying to troubleshoot the HVAC system, the Park Service figured out it had installed the wrong equipment. A consulting engineer concluded, quote, "The design of the HVAC system is incapable of consistently maintaining temperature and humidity." Why is this important? Well, Chaco's artifacts are 1,000 years old. In order to display them, museum standards require strict temperature and humidity controls. Because the installed HVAC system is unreliable, the Park Service had to pull the plug on its world-class artifact exhibit. Loan agreements were canceled, and all those priceless relics dug up here in Chaco Canyon years ago remain in storage back east. And all those brand new display cases here at Chaco, they're empty. Chaco's museum curator called it, quote, "a massive black eye in the museum community." Who's to blame here?
I think the Park Service is to blame. I think the American public deserves a lot better, and without artifacts, they're being cheated of the whole experience of Chaco. The people who were there had extraordinary skill, and you can't understand that skill unless you see the things they made.
Denise Robertson is Chaco Canyon's newly named park superintendent.
Chaco wasn't built in a day. nor was it built perfectly the first time around. So that evolved over time, and perhaps mistakes were made, in which we will own those mistakes.
Even though the problems were detected 3 years ago, the Park Service has made no effort to repair or replace the defective HVAC.
So we're working with the regional office to get a team of experts out to evaluate the system.
Do you know why the regional office hasn't done this years ago?
I don't know why the regional office hasn't done it years ago. The sheer remoteness of Chaco, it's difficult to get folks out here to take a look at things and to troubleshoot.
Do you have any idea what it's going to cost to either fix or replace that system?
We don't know exactly what the problems are, so it's hard to guess on what that would cost.
Although there are no artifacts in Chaco Canyon, the public can at least read about them in the gift shop.
If we're going to create a space force, we can certainly heat a building, a 1,500 square foot room in Chaco Canyon.
Larry Barker, KRQE News 13.
And on that wonderfully positive note,
I'm crying. 1,500 square feet is like
yeah,
not even half my house.
yeah.
I'm dead. I'm dead. We had so much fun on this chat. Oh my goodness. All right, it's 4:58. Let's take a quick break till 5:08. I'm not going to go anywhere, but I'll stop the recording. And then today is just Throw Shade Day. Today is so awesome. I'm dying. All right, I have some stuff too. All right, I am going to pause the recording. All right, so I have resumed recording, in case you were wondering, because I'm so excited about this lecture today. It's not even funny. So I'm going to jump right into it because I really want to have time to do the literature today. Oh, excellent. Good timing, Nikki. So let me share my screen here and go to, hopefully this will pop up. Welcome to SOSI section 4. So can everybody see? It's black for me right now. Hold on one second. Can everybody see my slideshow at the moment? It says, okay, perfect. So this is the last section of SOSI, and it is just sort of the impacts of what we have in terms of the American Revolution and how did it affect people going on from there. So section 4 to me seems really logically sort of easy. And when we get to the parts where I think that the nitty gritty is going to make the difference between us losing to Frontier and us beating Frontier, sorry, did I say that out loud in a recorded? I sure did. I'll tell you where I think the little details are, and the devil's in the details. But for the most part, if you generally answer any questions about section 4 with the theory of, yeah, it was better for white men, was for, women and people of color and Native Americans, you've kind of got the general idea down. So section 4 sort of starts with this idea that the American Revolution happened in America, or in the eastern coast of what is now America, but the repercussions reverberated around the world. There were movements in sort of in the next 75 years, give or take. I think that those dates are sort of, something that would be a really, really picky question. But basically, over the next almost century, between when, the Americans started the revolution and, like almost our Civil War, if you want to kind of couch it in that way in your head, there were other countries that took our ideals of not having an oppressive government and sort of ran with it. And interestingly enough, the same thing is going to happen sort of post-World War II, where India declares its independence in a non-bloody revolution from, again, Great Britain, and that reverberates throughout sort of the subcontinent and all across Africa. That's sort of the next 25, 30 years are just, boom, 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 freedom, all these countries kind of declaring their freedom. So the governments transfer from an absolutist monarchy where you have a king in charge or a queen in charge of, all of these colonies, to a constitutional republic, which is exactly what we are, where we have a constitution. We are not a direct democracy, we're a republic. I've said that 100 times. You'd think that America would be like, wow, we revolted and now you revolt, and look at, we're gonna just be revolutionaries together. But that was not, in fact, what went down. Instead, America was like, but you're so violent. And that was true in two countries that they really point out, France and Haiti. So let's talk about the French Revolution and then the Haitian Revolution. So France, as we were well aware from Section 2, really helped the US. The Marquis de Lafayette was instrumental in getting our revolution. And so I will, okay, thank you. And so it was King Louis the 16th. You may know him as the Sun King, the king who lived in Versailles, the Palace of Versailles. He joined in the American Revolution, not really to support the American ideals as much as to weaken Great Britain. But when the French revolted, their motto of liberty, equality, and fraternity, libertad, igualdad, no, I'm saying it in Spanish, but and fraternité, and their female ideal, their sculpted ideal of Lady Liberty sort of thing. I mean, just, direct, you could call it plagiarism, we could just call it imitation, being the sincerest form of flattery, to really, have that same revolutionary ideal there. The Marquis de Lafayette, when he leaves the new United States and goes back to France, he was not only welcomed there as a Revolutionary War hero and a commander-in-chief of the Parisian National Guard, but he was a member of the Estates General, which was sort of the governing body under the monarchy, like England had its parliament. And then when the French became an independent nation, that Estates General, just like we at the Continental Congress, they became the National Assembly. Same exact idea. The governing parliamentary body that was under the king becomes its own sort of National Assembly to vote. They published something called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen almost at the same time that we're publishing our Declaration of Independence. It's, we're talking about 1776 is when we do that, and we write the Constitution in 1781, 2, 3, 4, all that stuff. And they write theirs right around the same time. All men are free and equal. And then things get violent. Not like they didn't get violent here, just want to throw that out there, but they got so violent, they stormed the Bastille, which was a French prison. Funny enough, they don't, just July 14th, I had friends over there, they don't call it Bastille Day, we call it Bastille Day. In America, July 14th, we say, oh yes, the French people stormed the prison where people were wrongly imprisoned for, not paying their taxes. I hope that sounds familiar, Shays Rebellion, Whiskey Rebellion. But they don't call it Bastille Day. And the new French government sent George Washington a key to the door of the Bastille. They were like, look, we've liberated the people and we're going to, send this symbolic key to America to say that we're together. But then things escalated. People in France actually revolted and believed what they said when they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They actually didn't just leave it to white landowning slaveholding men. They went farther. They started to try to enact policies that supported the poor. That idea of Jay's Rebellion, Jay's Rebellion was like, hey, we don't want to, go to jail for not paying our taxes and paying off the debt. And in America, Shays Rebellion gets shut down by a privately paid militia, and Whiskey Rebellion gets shut down by George Washington leading the troop. And in France, it does not get shut down. Instead, they start to guillotine people. The leaders are imprisoned, and the old leaders were imprisoned and prosecuted and beheaded with the guillotine. And what were they trying to fight for? Well, they were fighting for the government having control of prices to keep inflation down and to keep food and things affordable. They were fighting for free education for everyone and compulsory. Compulsory means that it is required. So instead of allowing the kids from poorer families, let's say, to have to go to work to support their family and only having education for the rich or the boys, we're going to get back to that in a second. They want to make education available to everyone and required for everyone. Now, like 2022 now, we have free and compulsory public education up until the time you must be in school till you're 16 in some school or another. France wanted to enact that back in like 1789, 1790, and America was like, wait, what? And how did they want to pay for these things? The government control of inflation and free education for everyone? Well, they wanted to tax the rich. Make sure that the poor were supported, make sure that the disabled who couldn't work were supported. A real ideal of making sure that everybody had fraternity and brotherhood and equality and everything else. And Americans were like, oh dear, that's a problem. Who was executed? Well, Louis the 16th was executed, the Sun King. His wife, Marie Antoinette, famously saying, if they don't have bread, they should just eat cake, which was not quite what she said, but that's whatever. Other political leaders, but they started to also behead like rich citizens and everything else. France made it more complicated for themselves by basically going to war against all the other big European powers like England. And if you remember, George Washington was like, whoa, Nelly, we should not get involved with this. And so there was a coup, that coup d'état is actually pronounced coup d'état. It's probably about 2.5 French words that I know how to say. That is, there's sort of wild unrest in France. The US is like, we will not help you. And Napoleon Bonaparte gets up and says, forget all this chaos, I'm taking over, and basically crowns himself emperor. It is a coup is when the rightfully elected government is overthrown, usually illegally or unconstitutionally, by a faction or a military or a dictator. And so Napoleon got into that. And it only says that as sort of like a one sentence kind of throwaway. But essentially what you need to know is that France saw the United States rebel, successfully decided it would rebel, and the United States did not give it support in that time for quite a number of reasons, probably some good and some not so good. And there was chaos. And then Napoleon came along and was like, I am your leader now. Even worse in America's eyes was the successful Haitian Revolution. So Haiti is a small island country in the Caribbean off the coast of Florida. And in the late 1700s, that Caribbean area is really some of the lead producers in growing sugar. Sugar is very much a labor-intensive process, right? Sugar cane is like long sort of bamboo sticks, and it is very hard to grow and cut, and basically it's like harvesting little miniature forests all the time. And so the Caribbean island colonies that were owned by France, Saint-Domingue, and that one owned by France, and Jamaica, which was owned by the British, were the leading suppliers of sugarcane, and that was cut there and harvested there, and then sometimes taken to the United States or back to Europe to process. In 1787 alone, just 1 year, the year of 1787, so we are 10 years post declaring a revolution, just about, The French, not everybody, just the French, about to have their own Bastille Day 2 years later, the French imported to Saint-Domingue 20,000 enslaved persons that they had kidnapped from Africa, from various parts of Africa. 1 year, one country, 20,000 kidnapped victims, all brought to be slave laborers in one island. The work was harsh, plus they were exposed to diseases that they had not been exposed to before, or that killed them anyway, malaria, yellow fever, everything else. So the slaves were dying and dying and dying. The French plantation owners were in over in the Caribbean. And at first, a year or two later, as they watched Bastille Day unfold, and as they watched the, people in France that get overthrown and everything else, they were like, wow, power to the people. We're the little people. We're not King Louis XVI. We'll get and renegotiate trade deals. We'll make so much money. We'll do all of these things. And the slave population in these countries were like, I'm sorry, did we say equality? I think we said equality. I think I shouldn't be a slave anymore. I think I'm your equal. And in 1791, so just a couple years after the overthrow of the monarchy in France, the Haitians revolted, and they achieved independence. Took 15 years to do it, or 13 years to do it, but they achieved independence from their plantation overlords. They established independent rule that was run by non-whites and the formerly enslaved people. And that shift sort of upended all of the white American belief at the time that people of color were too dumb and too uneducated to be successful at running their own countries and governments and selves. Remember that there was a lot of that talk that people who were African from wherever in Africa needed whites, right, to take them from the savage beasts that they were back at home to civilized people, and they needed Christianity, and they needed to believe in all of these things, and that they were inferior to the white men. And here was Haiti being successful. The packet ends this section with this red quote right here, that the Haitian Revolution is now considered a central event in the history of the Atlantic world and the age of revolutions. And I throw that in there because I really could see a question from Acadec on what is a central event in this? And you wouldn't necessarily think of it as the Haitian Revolution. I certainly didn't really learn about it too much at the time. I will point out this Toussaint Louverture. He was a Haitian enslaved person who ended up helping to lead the Haitian Revolution, and was, just instrumental in bringing independence to Haiti. All right, so that's the first part of section 4. It's like, wow, the American Revolution spread worldwide. Here are 2 examples that America did not support because they thought it went too far. And they talk about France and they talk about Haiti. And then it switches gears a little bit. And this is the section that we're going to focus on today for the last half hour, which is how women did not, as we know, get the benefits of the American Revolution the way that that everybody else did. So there is a phrase that says common law. If you are common law married in most of the states of the United States, it means that you've been living together for so long that it's as if you really were married, and you actually get the same protections as a married couple does in terms of inheriting estates and in terms of having to pay alimony if you split up, or child care or whatever. And it's sort of this idea that, okay, well, it's not exactly, done according to the books of, law. You didn't get married, for instance, officially and register that marriage with the government in the state of California or wherever you get married, like by the power vested in me by the state of California, I now pronounce you, a couple or whatever. But that is the word common law sort of means like, it's just kind of, it works the same way. And this idea of common law was applied all the time to women and women's rights. There were not laws that specifically, let's say, forbade most of the practices that they wanted to do. It wasn't like, it was like, okay, everybody can do this, but women are especially not allowed to do this. They just kind of weren't written into the laws. They just kind of didn't have written rights there. I have the words common law from custom or judicial precedent. So like no jury has ever found in their favor that, it's the custom of the land rather than from like somebody writing a law, a statute where they write a law about this. Women had no legal rights. They really could not have a right to own property, to have her, if she made money at a job, it really sort of became her husband's. And this was things like that. It was called the law of coverture. And coverture is a fancy way of saying being covered by. So you may have heard, like in modern day, we talk about that you can stay on your parents' health insurance till you're 26. You are covered by your parents' health insurance till you're 26, for instance. The law of coverture basically took women and put them in that same kind of kid-like status. So just like if you're a kid, your parents really have the right to, agree to a contract for you. You can't sign a contract till you're legally 18, things like that. Your parents are sort of in charge of all of that stuff. Well, the same thing is true for women, even if they were, full grown and whatever. So a daughter or a wife had no legal rights to her property, no legal rights to her earnings, no legal rights to her freedom of movement. So she couldn't travel without having her husband's permission, her body or her children. All of those rights resided in either her father or, if she was married, her husband. A married woman was also called a femme couverte. I think I'm mispronouncing that, but like a covered woman. That was the idea. Widows inherited the right. Let's say that, like, I'm a widow, so my husband passed away. I could now own this house. But it was so hard to be an unmarried woman in the late 1700s that many women just remarried. We've seen that a lot with our art people, that they just sort of got remarried or whatever. And most of all was this sort of overarching theory that women were just not intellectually equal to men, that just like Blacks were considered intellectually inferior, and then the Haitian Revolution happened, and all these white plantation owners were like, what is that? So the same way, women were just sort of thought to be intellectually dumber than men. And then some women were like, excuse me, like, we need to talk about this. And there are 3 people that the packet mentions specifically, 2 of whom have literature pieces in our short selection. So I'm going to sort of present them all, and we're going to do this first literature selection, and I'll tell you why I'm so excited about it. So the first person that we don't have a specific piece from in our lit packet, but is mentioned in the SOSI packet, is a woman named Eliza Wilkinson. She was from South Carolina, and she, speaking about how, you can communicate plainly and make your point beautifully. So she said, look, I won't have it thought that because we are the weaker sex, and she meant mostly physically as to bodily strength, we're capable of nothing more than domestic concerns. Like, no, I don't buy that just because we're weaker physically doesn't mean that we can only worry about the house. They won't even allow us liberty of thought. And that is all I want, she said. And then we have this woman named Judith Sargent Murry. Judith Sargent Murry. So fun little fact, if you've read Frankenstein, and I think a bunch of you read it with Huddleston this year, or last year or whatever, it's one of my favorite books. My mom and I were talking about that. So Frankenstein was written by a woman named Mary Shelley. She was called Mary after her mother. We'll talk about that in a second. Then she married a poet named Percy Shelley, which was not a great plan for her. But so she was the daughter of a woman named Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. She was named, her mother died, and she was named Mary also. But Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother of Mary Shelley, was a feminist, a very early feminist. And she wrote a very, very famous essay about how women were equal. In fact, she didn't get married for a long time because she was like, forget this. She had children out of wedlock. And she was, which very unusual back then. And she writes this whole treatise or whatever. Well, Judith Sargent Murry publishes an essay about feminism 2 years before Mary Wollstonecraft does. So really, this chick, this is her up here on the upper left side, Judith Sargent Murry. She writes an essay, in fact, a collection of essays called On the Equality of the Sexes. And she was basically like, look, women aren't dumber. They're just taught to be that way. They're never given exposure to, science and math and literature and all kinds of other stuff. They're taught to be sort of stay at home, like, sewing and, gossiping and whatever else. And if they were given the chance, they would just blossom. And this would be, amazing. And so she writes this piece, and it's from the literature. So I'm going to come back over here to the literature section, which is, if you click on that link, you'll get taken to the literature resource guide. It's in our classroom folder. She herself, Judith Sargent Murry, was actually educated according to a man's curriculum. She was educated with not just in piano and dance and needlework and French, which was what kind of girls were supposed to be in, but she got Latin and Greek and natural philosophy, which is actually like science like we know it more now. They didn't have a true like science thing, but you got like some chem and some physics and stuff of what they knew about chemistry and stuff back then, geography and math, and she launches schools. And her whole point is not to teach like girly things, but to really, do this. This is the whole thing about Mary Wollstonecraft, how she like predates her. And so she writes this essay called On the Equality of Sexes, and it is published in a monthly magazine under a pseudonym. And some people think, oh, she published it under a pseudonym to hide her true identity. But remember, the Federalist Papers also, and the Anti-Federalist Papers, all get published under pseudonyms. So it was sort of a general idea. First of all, it was sort of like the way to do it. Just like we might like all have, how on Discord we all have nicknames, like that's a whole thing. So we have these ideas that that's kind of just how it was done. And also that by publishing it under her pseudonym, her anonymous name, she could purport to speak for many people as opposed to just herself. So she, instead of just talking about, oh, my name is Judith Sargent Murry. And isn't this funny? This is a very famous portrait of her by our own John Copley, who we've now seen have portraits of, like, he knew everybody. He does everybody's portrait. So here she is. And she picked the name Constantia. And let me point out that it was not really to hide her identity, because Constantia would be a feminine name. So she's not trying to not be female. She's trying to show that this is a great thing. So I get to this, I'm like, wait a minute, because the other person that we have that we're going to get to after this is Abigail Adams, who wrote to her husband and was like, hey, women should have, the right to vote. When you write your Constitution there, hubby, throw that in, you know. And he's like, you're so silly. But so we're going to read both of these letters. So I get to this and I'm like, okay, let me read this. Let me see what we have. Okay, it's 5:35. Awesome. And I start reading it. And my first thought is, oh my God, like she doesn't know how to use the paragraph ever. Like it's all just a giant block of text. And I thought, oh my God, like I don't want to read this. That my affective filter just went way up, like, oh no, I don't want to read this. But then I thought, first of all, she wasn't officially taught how to write well, right? I mean, like, you know, no one came around. I mean, and look at, by the way, let me just point out that Madison and Hamilton can't write either. Like, fun fact. She writes so much better than they do. I'm so pumped up because she just starts throwing shade. So I'm going to read this out loud because I feel like when you are writing in the 1790s, and there isn't sort of a convention of like, you know, if you get to like 7 or 8 sentences and your paragraph is looking really long, time to break it up into another paragraph. Like we have literally all taught you the Jane Schaefer method of writing, where we're like topic, sentence, and then, you know, concrete detail, commentary, concrete detail, commentary, conclusion, next paragraph. She didn't have Jane Schaefer. So I want to read it to you and make sure you understand it, but it is so good. Oh my gosh, she just goes to town. So, and that's how we're going to end today. So she starts her essay in the Massachusetts Magazine with a poem. Okay, but it is there. So she starts, that minds are not alike, full well I know. This truth each day's experience will show. So I know all mine, like I know not all brains are alike, and every day I see this, what I'm talking about. To heights surprising, some great spirits soar, with inborn strength, mysterious depths explore. Their eager gaze surveys the path of light, confessed it stood to Newton's piercing sight. Wow, like Isaac Newton, one of those minds that soared. Deep science, like a bashful maid, retires, but the ardent breast her worth inspires. By perseverance, the coy fair is won. And genius, led by study, wears the crown. So some people, she says, are really smart. But some there are who wish not to improve, who never can the path of knowledge love, whose souls almost with dull body won. With anxious care, each mental pleasure shun. There's some people who just like say, talk to the hand. I'm not listening. Weak is the leveled, enervated mind, but while here to vegetate designed, the torpid spirit mingling with its clod can scarcely boast its origin from God. So she's going to use a lot of religious justification to showcase why men and women are equal. And one of her main points is, you know, God created the body, but everybody has a spirit, a soul. And you can't tell me that some souls are masculine and some souls are feminine, because the guys in the Old and New Testament are really, some of them are really challenged. Like they're not paragons of virtue. They have all these kind of issues. And she, oh my God, I love her now. So she's like, wow, like some people are so dumb, stupidly dull. They move, progressing on. They eat and drink, and all their work is done. While others, emulous of sweet applause, industrious seek for each event a cause, tracing the hidden springs whence knowledge flows, which nature all in beauteous order shows. So some people are dumb and lazy, some people are industrious and smart. Yet cannot I their sentiments imbibe, who this distinction to the sex ascribe. So some people say men are smart and women are dumb, and that's the division. Just men are smart and industrious and go for it, and women are just dull and boring. As if a woman's form must make a servile and inferior soul, and that the guise of man must still proclaim greatness of mind, and him to be the same. Yet as the hours revolve, fair proofs arise, which the bright wreath of growing fame supplies. And in past times, some men have sunk so low that female records nothing less can show. Some guys are so dumb and boring and stupid that there's no woman, like there's no woman who's like less like more boring and dumb than these guys are. But imbecility is still confined and by the lordly sex to us consigned. So men may tell women that they're dumb, that imbecility, being stupid, is a feminine trait. But who's saying that? The guys. The guys are saying that about the women. They rob us of the power to improve and then declare we only trifles love, yet haste the era when the world shall know that such distinctions only dwell below, like on the material earth. The soul, unfettered, to no sex confined, the soul is genderless, was for the abodes of cloudless day designed. Meantime, we emulate their manly fires, through erudition all their thoughts inspires, yet nature with equality imparts, and noble passions swell even female hearts. So she's like, dude, you know, you got it all wrong. And then she starts this paragraph that, I'm not kidding, goes on forever. So let me do that. We may or may not get through all of it, but it'll be good. Is it upon mature consideration we adopt the idea that nature is thus partial in her distributions? Is it, if we stop and think about it, are we really saying that nature is like, yay men, bad women? Is it indeed a fact that she hath yielded to 1/2 of the human species so unquestionable a mental superiority? I know that to both sexes, elevated understandings, and also the reverse, are common. But suffer me to ask, in what the minds of females are so notoriously deficient or unequal? May not the intellectual powers be ranged under these 4 heads: imagination, reason, memory, and judgment? So she's like, look, if you take intelligence to be some ability to imagine things, some ability to reason through things, some ability to remember things, and some ability to judge and come up with a, you know, correct judgment of a situation. If you look at intelligence as being on those 4 traits, she's now going to lay out her proof, because remember, she's you know, educated in the arts of man. She is going to lay out her proof for why women have imagination, reason, memory, and judgment. And she's like, you make us take our imagination and use it poorly, but if you would let us use it for good, boom, we'd own you. The province of imagination hath long since been surrendered up to us, and we have crowned undoubted sovereigns of the regions of fancy. Women are like great at imagining weird things. Invention is perhaps the most arduous effort of the mind. This branch of imagination hath previously been ceded to us, and we have been time out of mind invested with that creative faculty. Observe the variety of fashions. Here I bar the contemptuous smile. I try not to smile. Observe the variety of fashions which distinguish and adorn the female world. How continually are they changing, insomuch that they almost render the whole man's assertion problematical. And we are ready to say, there is something new under the sun. Now, what a playfulness, what an exuberance of fancy, what strength of inventive imagination doth this continual variation discover? She's like, look, take the example of women's fashions. This is in fashion. Oh no, just kidding. It's out of fashion. I got to get this. I got to wear this. I got to put my hair like this. I got to put my dress like that. I got to be in fashion. Oh my God, that's so last week. I'm not wearing that anymore. She's like, that's actually really imagination kind of corrupted and gone wild. But like, if you're telling me that women don't have the same kind of imagination as men, you're wrong. We just, you know, are forced to use it in like style and like, oh, what's in fashion and what's not in fashion and what's new and what's not new. And oh, I thought of something different to do with my hairdress, ribbon, whatever. But that's imagination. It's just, we're forced, instead of being like, how does this machine work? We're like, I got to tie my hair different. Again, it hath been observed that if the turpitude of the conduct of our sex had ever been so enormous, so extremely ready are we that the first thought presents us with an apology so plausible as to produce our actions even in an amiable light. Another instance of our creative powers is our talent for slander. So yeah, we're so imaginative that we gossip about people. That's how we use our imagination, she says. How ingenious are we at inventive scandal? We just make stuff up about people. What a formidable story can we in a moment fabricate merely from the force of a prolific imagination? How many reputations in the fertile brain of a female have been utterly despoiled? How industrious are we at improving a hint? Suspicion, how easily do we convert into conviction, and conviction, embellished by the power of eloquence, stalks abroad to the surprise and confusion of unsuspecting innocence. We tell tales, we embellish on them, we get better and better at, which is, again, pretty sexist, but is she saying, like, we have plenty of imagination, we're smart, we just use it wrong. Perhaps it will be asked if I furnish these facts as instances of excellency in our sex. Certainly not, but as proofs of a creative faculty, of a lively imagination. Yes, that's why I'm talking about them. Assuredly, great activity of mind is thereby discovered. And was this activity properly directed, what beneficial effects would follow? Is the needle and the kitchen sufficient to employ the operation of a soul thus organized? If you confine us to just cooking and sewing, we're bored out of our minds, and we're going to start doing terrible stuff with our imagination, she says. I should conceive not. It's not enough to just keep us to the kitchen. Nay, it is a truth that those very departments leave the intellectual principle vacant and at liberty for speculation. So that's the end of her justification, that women have just as much imagination, if not more, than men. So her second thing was imagination, and then reason. That reason is intelligence evidence number 2. So now her next part of her paragraph is going to be all about how women are just as intelligent as men. Are we deficient in reason? We can only reason from what we know. And if opportunity of acquiring knowledge has been denied to us, the inferiority of our sex cannot be fairly be deduced from then. We've never been given the option to learn Latin and Greek, except I have, she says quietly. So how would you know? How would you know? You wouldn't, because you kept us from learning it. So you didn't give us a chance to use our reason, did you? No, you didn't. All right, the third thing is memory. Can you remember things? Memory, I believe, will be allowed us in common, both men and women, since everyone's experience must testify that a loquacious old woman, a talkative old woman, is as frequently met with as a communicative old man. There are just as many yappy old ladies as there are yappy old men. Their subjects are alike drawn from the fund of other times and the transactions of their youth or of maturer life. Entertain or perhaps fatigue you in the evenings of their lives. As they get older, they talk about their, what they were like when they were kids or whatever, and they either entertain you or they're boring and you just have to deal with them and whatever. It's funny as anything right now. But our judgment is not so strong. We do not distinguish so well. So her fourth thing is about so she's like, look, we have imagination. We have, we have imagination. We have the ability to reason if only you'd given to us. Men and women both have memory. So now let's talk about judgment. And this is her final part. And she says, but people say, oh, but women's judgment is not as strong as well. They don't distinguish so well between what's good and what's bad. Yet it may be questioned, from what does this superiority and this determining faculty of the soul proceed? May we not trace its source in the difference of education and continued advantages? It's the same thing as the reasoning. You don't give us a chance to be to judge situations. Will it be said that the judgment of a male of 2 years old is more sage than a female's of the same age? If you compare 2 toddlers, does the boy have better judgment than the girl? I believe the reverse is generally observed to be true, she says. But from that period, what partiality? How the one is exalted, the boy is brought up, and the girl is depressed by the contrary modes of education which are adopted. The one, the boy, is taught to aspire, and the other is early confined and limited. As their years increase, the sister must be wholly domesticated, while the brother is led by the hand through all the flowery paths of science. And the afterwards, when they go through this, they're like, you know, we're fighting this in 2022. We're still fighting that, you know, the girls should go into STEM and math and all this other stuff, and that, you know, boys are sort of naturally encouraged. And my mom has talked about this too, how the boys, when she was in school, they took chemistry and physics, and she took another foreign language. I mean, you know, we've been fighting this for hundreds of years. Grant that the minds are by nature equal, yet who shall wonder at the apparent superiority, if indeed custom becomes second nature? Nay, if it taketh the place of nature, and then it doth the experience of each day will evince. At length, arrived at womanhood, the uncultivated fair one feels a void, which the employments allotted her are by no means capable of filling. What can she do? To books she may not apply, or if she does, to only those of the novel kind, yet lest she merit the appellation of a learned lady. She's not taught to read texts. The only kind of books that are available to women at this time are novels, which have not even been written in America. So she used to go back to like English novels, until our novel. But she can't read any texts. She can only read novels, because if she tries to educate herself, she'll be like a smart aleck, a learned lady. Like, that's an insult at that time. And she's like, look, her brain's gonna just stagnate and rot and like fall out of her head, my guys. And what ideas have been affixed to this term, the observation of many can testify. That's a bad name for us. Fashion, scandal, and sometimes what is still more reprehensible are then called in to her relief. And who can say to what lengths the liberties she takes may proceed? She's going to get, called unfashionable, and it's going to be a scandal, and she's never going to get out of it. Meantime, she herself is most unhappy. She feels the want of a cultivated mind. Is she single? If she's single, but is she single? She in vain seeks to fill up time from sexual employments or amusements, meaning she's nothing to do. So she ends up like flirting and, trying to like matchmake and all this other stuff. Is she united to a person whose soul nature made equal to her own? Education hath set him so far above her that in those entertainments which are productive of such rational felicity, she is not qualified to accompany him. So she's married to a smart guy. She's starting so far behind the starting line, right? He's been taught how to like read and logic and think, and he'd been exposed to science and math and all this other stuff since he was 2. If they're now 20 years later, she's 20 years behind him. So even if they're the same intellectual superiority, she just doesn't have that background knowledge to engage with him as an equal. She experiences a mortifying consciousness of inferiority, which embitters every enjoyment. And then the worst case, says this author, doth the person to whom her adverse fate hath consigned her possess a mind incapable of improvement, she is equally wretched in being so closely connected with an individual whom she cannot but despise. And if her dad has married her off to some flippin' moron, she's stuck with a moron. She can't, she doesn't even feel inferior to him. She just hates him. Now, and we should say that this is very heteronormative here, and I'm sorry for that. Now, was she permitted the same instructors as her brother, with an eye, however, to their particular departments, like what she likes versus what he likes, for the employment of a rational mind, and an ample field would be opened? And here's her, I think, interesting twist on it. So she's not like, hey, give women the education so that they can become smart and rule the world. She couches everything in a religious background. She's like, look, if you taught us all of these things, we would know God better, which I think is a smart move on her part, because it's less threatening than, geez Louise, man, you're doing a crap job of running this country. I'm going to fix it for you. Instead, she's like, we would just get closer to God. Wouldn't that be a good plan for you? She says, look, if you exposed us in astronomy, she might catch a glimpse of the immensity of the deity, and thence she would form amazing conceptions of the august and supreme intelligence. In geography, she would admire Jehovah, God, in the midst of his benevolence, thus adapting this globe to the various wants and amusements of its inhabitants. In natural philosophy, which is science, she would adore the infinite majesty of heaven, clothed in condescension. As she traversed the reptile world, she would hail the goodness of a creating God. As she looked around at nature, she would on the reptile world, on the earthly world that we inhabit, she would see God. A mind thus filled would have little room for the trifles with which our sex are, with too much justice, accused of amusing themselves, and they would be thus rendered fit companions for those who should one day wear them as their crown. So, you know, we would finally be equal to men, she says. Fashions in their variety would then give place to conjectures, which might perhaps conduce to the improvement of the literary world. There would be no leisure for slander or detraction. Reputation would not then be blasted, but serious speculations would occupy the lively imaginations of the sex. Unnecessary visits would be precluded, and that custom would only be indulged by way of relaxation or to answer the demands of consanguinity and friendships. Females would become discreet, their judgments would be invigorated, and their partners for life being circumspectly chosen, an unhappy hymen would then be as rare as is now the reverse. And what a fabulous thing. That footnote, by the way, indicates that hymen was apparently the Greek god of marriage. Ask me if I ever knew that. That was not the connotation that I had. That was a physical connotation, but makes sense that they would name it after the Greek god of marriage. But in other words, she'd stop gossiping and she'd be able to write novels like Mary Shelley does with Frankenstein, the first sci-fi novel ever published. Boom, shakalaka. You know, after her mother and this woman whose name I'm forgetting, but I will get there in a second, Judith Sargent Murry, does this. And she basically says, you know, look, you know, if you educated women, the gods of marriage would be happy. The gods of marriage would be happy. I think that I will stop there at the bottom of page 78 because she literally goes on for another bunch of pages. So I will remember to start at the top of page 79. I will remember to start at the top of page 79 today. Oh, I have to read the chat. I wasn't I wasn't seeing any of the chat, so I'm gonna have to definitely watch the chat now. I mean, dang girl, like you could have used a little bit of an editor, but I mean, I just feel the difference between the passion and the logic that she's using to write and like the Federalist Papers, which were like, you know, oh, I'll get there when I get there, whatever. So she is just casting shade right there. And it just goes on and it just goes on. So it looks like we may take a little bit longer to finish the SOSI, which is fine because we have art history too that we could look at before we start things. And if we don't get it finished before that, my plan is to do this on finish this. It may even take most of the hour on Wednesday. And if we get through this, we'll do the Abigail Adams as well. So we'll have covered more of the literature as well, which I just think it just links in. And they even mention that there's a Phyllis Wheatley thing in there, and there's a parallel here because Murray puts out this idea of the women should be taught and they shouldn't be considered dumb because they're women. And Phyllis Wheatley was like, we shouldn't be considered dumb because of the color of our skin. So all of this goes all together and it's really cool. And thank you for joining us. It is 6 o'clock. I'm ending the recording. If you have any questions, stick around, and otherwise we'll see you on Wednesday.